spend a lot of time just trying to piece together one job to the next project until I have something that sort of kind of resembles a paycheck and an existence, you know what I mean? And I mean, don't get me wrong with that. I've had a lot of chances to do a lot of things. I mean, I've been all over the place. I've been to, you know, Thailand or Morocco or the Philippines or Guatemala. I mean, you name it, right? If you take a dart and you kind of throw it at the map, and if it lands somewhere in Central or South America, there's a pretty good chance I've been there recently enough to have bug bites from the local mosquitoes, yeah? And I've gotten to do a lot with that. You know, I've done everything from, let's see, I've worked for medical nonprofits. I've spent time working with urban renewal programs in developing countries. I've had the chance to help indigenous populations start conservation efforts, okay, in some of the world's most at-risk forests. Sounds impressive, yeah? But, you know, as I sat kind of thinking about what I was going to talk to you guys about today, it wasn't so much the places and it wasn't so much the, you know, the things I've done, is the fear that I experience on a daily basis, you know, and there's nothing else that you guys get from me today. It's understand that fear can be just as much a positive motivator as anything else. Sometimes using that fear and letting it push you is a way for you to not only understand your own limits, but to impact the world in ways that you might not have been able to consider otherwise. I want to start with this picture right here. This is a picture of my wife and I. That's Robin. She is, wow. I mean, she is the most supportive person I've ever met. I swear to God, I fall in love with this girl a little bit more every single day. This is the part where you go, aw. Thanks. Okay. You know, and one of the cool things about modern photography here is it does a really good job of making people look a lot cooler than they seem. You know, check out that jaw, you know. I don't know what they had to do with Photoshop to get that right. But, you know, one of the bad parts then about modern photography is it can't quite get the motion of my wife rolling her eyes in the background there, so I'm going to make what I do. So this is a photo that was taken in Martinique. Robin and I were asked to be the wilderness medics on a small team expedition led by a British adventurer by the name of Dave Cornthwaite. And so basically our job was to follow this crazy British man around this island and make sure that he didn't die. Okay? So it was the first time that this has been attempted on non-motorized transport. As you'll see, we did the entire thing with stand-up paddleboards. We didn't have any supply boats, no support vessels of any kind. Everything that we did, we had to take all of our gear, throw it on the boards, and then paddle around. You might be thinking, wow, Rob, that's really impressive that a guy from South Dakota, a landlocked state in the middle of a continent, is so well versed in ocean travel. You might guess, right? This whole pushing myself, this whole fear thing that I talk about, using it as a motivator, sometimes gets me into a little deeper water than I have any right being in. I mean, no pun intended here. Just to give you a little background on my experience up to this point, I've got a video to show you guys here.
You might think that a certain prerequisite for a team to paddleboard 150 miles around an island would be that they knew how to paddleboard, but the type of people who get hung up on these small details usually end up playing chess against themselves and living with a tribe of domestic cats. Just so we're clear, Ben and Spike had never paddled on an ocean before this night. Robin had 20 minutes of sup experience. Rob hadn't even heard of the sport before he arrived at the hotel. 16 hours before our journey began, we had a quick practice session, just to build confidence.
Smile.
So, you know, if we haven't really established this by now, okay, there should be no illusions that I'm some kind of hero in this whole story. So, yeah, that was kind of the learning curve right there. So I was scared enough just trying to get up on that board and paddle around that stupid island in the first place, right? But then the storm hit. So we were about halfway through the expedition, about 150 miles altogether, and we were just rounding Martinique's north coast, okay? And the north coast of Martinique is essentially one gigantic cliff face right where the Atlantic and the Caribbean come together and meet, which means that you have to make this in one big push because there's really no spot to land, okay? So we set out, and this is just as I'm learning how to stand and kind of not wobble over all the time. So we get out, and the storm pushes in, and unfortunately, we had to crash land. And this picture that you see here is really the only sort of beach that we were able to find at all on the north coast of the island. And it was slim. I mean, you can see kind of where the edge of the shore is here, and then right where the frame ends is kind of where there was this big, maybe 90-foot cliff face that shot straight up. So we were stuck. I mean, we had no access out. We had no means of communication. There were no boats coming by. Of course, there was this big storm going on, and these waves were just relentless. You know, they just kept pushing us back, pushing us back, pushing us back. So we got stuck, okay? And we got stuck there for just over 2 days. Did I mention that we almost ran out of food? So when we made this landing, of course, it was a crash landing because, you know, we were terrible at paddleboarding. And we lost a good deal of our fresh water, and we lost a good deal of our food on the approach. This gentleman here is the legend Spike Reed. And what he is doing is taking his penknife and chipping out some of the coconuts that we found to try to supplement some of the food and water that we lost. You know, and you learn a lot about fear when you're sitting on an island in your little tiny hammock, listening to the rain pound down and listening to these waves just crash and again up against the shore. And I think what I want to make sure that we do here is kind of dispel any illusions we might have about fear. It's not something romantic. Right? It's not something sexy, and I think a lot of people can understand that. You know, think about a time that you've been truly afraid, you know. Maybe there's been an illness, maybe someone's died, and there's that feeling of not knowing that just makes your knees shake and makes you wonder. It's easy to laugh and joke about now because we made it back, right? But at the time, I mean, gosh, that was scary. This is a photo of the day that we were finally able to make it off. You'll notice these rocks down here at the bottom are really smooth. It's because these waves here are so persistent and so gutsy that they'll take these sharp rocks and they'll pull them back out into the waves and they'll smash them back up against the shore until all the rough edges are sort of chipped clean, right? So not only are we trying to deal with these 5, 10, sometimes 15-foot waves that just kept pushing us back and back and back, there's these big waves that are just churning underneath them, smacking against our knees and our ankles and our feet every time we got thrown off the board. I mean, that's scary, you know? And I remember thinking about if I wasn't going to be strong enough to get out, or if my wife wasn't strong enough to get out. We all hold on to fear. You know, I think what we do with it, I think that's a decision that we get to make a lot of the time. You know, me, I think about death a lot. And it's not, you know, it's not the sort of way that, you know, your mom or your mother-in-law tells you, like, oh, make sure that you live every day like it's your last, you know. It's not that sort of thing. I see myself die again and again and again. I can't stop it, right? I can't turn it off. You know, I know that it's highly unlikely, but in my mind, it's very possible that tonight on my drive home, for whatever reason, I lose control of my car and I spin out and flip into a ditch and I'm laying there bleeding before emergency personnel has a chance to get to me. You know, I think about if I got to tell my wife how much I care about her, if I get the chance to tell my parents thank you, you know. And you might think to yourself, Rob, for a guy that likes paddling around an island, you know, being afraid of death, that's kind of a stupid combination, right? And I tell you, what I'm more afraid of than death, okay, is dying without really living, without exploring this thing. And it's there where I find a lot of that motivation. Okay, if I've got one shot at this life, then I better make sure that it's worth it. Sometimes that might push me around an island. Sometimes it might, you know, take me here or there or wherever. Sometimes it might just take me across the street. But I understand that it's important, okay, because what we do with fear matters a lot. I want to talk about Guatemala for a second. This is a picture of a family that I've had the great fortune to stay with in the northern part of the country called the Petén. It's a very rural community. As you can see, there's just dirt floors right here. It's very simple, just kind of slat boards for the houses there. And we've spent a lot of time working with an organization called BOITA, which seeks to kind of research and document how illegal lumber and poaching has affected the ecosystems in the northern part of the country. And it's great to go out there and to learn and experience these things alongside them. And what you have to understand about these big primary forests, okay, these primary growth forests, is that everything is huge out there. I mean, the palms are big, the trees are big. Some of the trees, it takes, you know, 8, 10 people to stand around, you know, and try to put arms together, and you still can't do it. And there's another thing out there that is absolutely friggin' enormous, and it's these guys. Ugh. So this is a actual 2-scale size of one of the spiders that I saw out there. Okay, beat me in an arm wrestling match. It was a little embarrassing, but you know, it is what it is. I will pull no punches here, guys. I am a serious wuss when it comes to spiders, and they are out there, and they are big, and they are real. I mean, there are some spiders that are as big as your hand. Okay, no lie, big as your hand, and they'll just creep right up next to you in the middle of the night. You know, they just want something warm to sleep by. Ugh. And we were out there, we were working with this gentleman named Guy. And Guy is a French Canadian who speaks terrible English and even worse Spanish. I don't know why he was there. But I was talking to Guy. One day I came back from one of the outposts. I said, Guy, you should have seen it, man. There was a spider that we ran into, and it was as big as my hand. Big as my hand. And he looks at me because, you know, at that point I figured that something didn't translate. And he says, big as your hand? That's my French Canadian accent, I'm sorry. And I go, yeah. He looks at me, and it kind of didn't make sense, you know. And he said, but look how big we are. And it just kind of, for whatever reason, right? Maybe I've been out in the forest too long, but it just clicked. Look at how big we are, you know. We get a decision to make. We can choose a lot of the time how we let fear impact us. A lot of the time, it's easy to let fear isolate you, okay? I know it is for me. And I think to myself, I'm deathly afraid of spiders. So you know what? If there's a lot of spiders out there in the forest, I probably shouldn't go out into the forest because that's bad. So all of a sudden, I take this wall and I put it up around this fear that I have. But I understand that when I put those walls up, okay, and I keep all the bad things out that I'm so scared of, I make my world a very small and less vibrant place. I might be afraid of spiders, but I realize that if I isolate myself from that fear, I never would have had the chance to go out into the Peten and learn from the indigenous cultures the way that I had the opportunity to do. I wouldn't have had the chance to meet as many people and to understand the problems that face this particular part of the world with as much intimacy and nuance as I was able to. So in that sense, I mean, sometimes, you know, acknowledging fear and understanding that it's real. I mean, your fears, my fears, they're there. Understanding sometimes we can use them to push us forward. And the more I've found that I'm able to reach out past those fears, okay, the more I've found that there is community that is out there that's willing to reach out and pull me in and help me at the same time. I want to talk lastly about this community called La Carpio. So La Carpio is a shanty town on the outskirts of San Jose in Costa Rica. It is situated at the crossroads between the country's largest landfill and its most polluted river. I mean, this place is rough. I mean, almost without exception, the buildings here are made out of cinder block or corrugated metal siding. Unemployment is nearly an expectation in a place like this. You know, and it's dark, right? I mean, unfortunately, rape happens, you know, to children as young as 5 or 6 years old. This is a community that really doesn't have much of a voice in elections. They really have no means to acquire any sort of government funding for educations and things like that. And aside from a few NGOs that reside in the community, they really are on their own. Something even simple, you know, you look at this, just trying to get into a house. I mean, codes are hardly enforced. There's these low-hanging power lines. You're jumping over raw sewage just to get into somebody's home. It's a rough place. I mean, you'll walk down the street and you'll mistake children for siblings simply because the mother is 12 years old. I mean, this is a place that is no stranger to fear. I mean, imagine that. You know, I think about the things that I'm worried about, things that I'm scared about. I imagine, you know, being a mother, trying to figure out just how you're going to feed your children. You know, even worse, thinking about what you're going to have to do to feed those kids. And I think the tendency is to pity these guys. But I'm telling you, they don't pity themselves. And sure, they've been dealt a rough hand, and sure, they need plenty of help. They need people to go out and help lift them up. But this is still a community that understands how to thrive. They're not neglecting fear. They're not putting it under the rug. They still learn how to move forward with optimism and hope. And you go out there on the streets, and you still see brothers that will pick on each other and tease each other and joke around with each other, right? You'll see them holding parades in the middle of the day for no reason, right? They'll still smile. They enjoy each other's company. They celebrate together. And mothers still love their daughters. I mean, this is a place that's got it rough. But despite that fear, they can acknowledge it. They can band together, and they can move forward as a community. They understand fear. They're not pretending it's not there. They're just using it differently. They can isolate themselves, and so they move forward together. So I guess the question then, you know, is what about you? I mean, what are you afraid of? What walls have you put up to make your world small, yeah? What's your spider, you know? You don't need a paddleboard to live and examine life. I mean, believe me, the coconuts get old really, really quickly. I'm just challenging you guys to stretch. I mean, embrace, acknowledge those fears that you have and understand that they might help you open your limits up and help someone else in the process. Take that risk. And if you get burned, at least acknowledge that you learned something in the way. Fear can be a motivator. It can be a motivator for good. It can help us inflict positive things on those around us. I need you guys to go out there and learn these things and then come back and teach me, because I am positive that I do not have all the answers here. I need you guys to go out and explore that fear and then come back and teach me, because I am certain that there is more good in this world than there is bad. Go out, understand those fears, and then come back and teach me, because I am positive that the fears that we experience alone are nothing to the strength that we can experience together. Thank you.